The era of ESPN now, Chad, is it different from the era that we're moving out of, which was woke?
Well, every time that we think that we've completely moved past the the Wizenhunt era and the woke era of ESPN with Jimmy Pitaro and others, we think we've completely moved past it, and then just something ridiculous happens. Like, oh, well, maybe there are still people just making terrible decisions. The latest was a decision made by someone to not play the moment of silence and the national anthem the day after the New Orleans terror attack for that game between Georgia and Notre Dame down in New Orleans. So there's been some stuff said about what happened. Most of it's been said by OutKick, criticizing the decision, whoever made it at ESPN, to not air it. So I was really surprised to see an ESPN executive actually address it and be upfront about what happened. And that was Burke Magnus when he appeared on the Sports Media Podcast. Here is Burke.
I know there's a little bit of controversy regarding you guys not covering the anthem in New Orleans for the game. Can you speak about that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, actually. Let me just say this. There's a group of people in Bristol who just made an enormous mistake. It was a human error. It happens. I don't want to minimize it by any stretch. But as you noted, like, nothing was normal about that next day, including our programming lineup, where we normally would have had College Game Day and that crew leading into the game. It wasn't that. It was Sports Center, which is done out of Bristol instead of inside. I could give you a whole host of reasons why it was not the normal circumstance. But at the end of the day, that was just a horrible error that was made by a group of really well-intentioned people who feel terrible about it. I lost my father over the holiday break, and he was an Army veteran, and there was nothing more important to him than his military service. My parents took my sisters and I to West Point every single week. We had season tickets to Army football growing up. The notion that was somehow intentional, or we were trying to avoid acknowledging what was a horrific situation in New Orleans was really misplaced. It was just a mistake that we feel terrible about. And by the way, we should be held to account for, right? Like we want to be as good as we can possibly be at all times. And even though it was not a normal situation, our traffic got fouled up, our timing got fouled up. We happened to be in commercial break when the anthem happened. It was just not good by any measuring stick, and not up to our standards. I think what you have seen since then in terms of the other CFP games are NFL games in Week 18 in the wild card. Like, we're not avoiding the anthem, quite the opposite. It's a special moment for all sports fans at big events, and you'll see the same treatment in the college football championship game coming up on Monday.
Yeah, and he says we should be held to account for it. We should be criticized for it because it was a terrible mistake on the part of ESPN. Bravo, Burke Magnus. I would feel like a phony if I came on here every day and just took one position of hammering someone even when they don't deserve it for no reason at all. ESPN's earned a lot of the hammering they've received from OutKick and others. This is a time where I'm going to give credit where credit's due, because I don't see a lot of executives at that level coming out and just falling on the sword and saying, we made an egregious error. We screwed it up. It was well-intentioned, but we made bad decisions back in Bristol. And because of that, we did something that we should not have done. And then Burke Magnus explaining his background, going to West Point for games. That's all fine and dandy. So I want to give Burke Magnus full credit for not just running and hiding. Because I think most in his position, they would hide in their office and not say a word and just wait for it all to go away. And by the way, it probably would go away eventually. But instead, he got asked a direct question about it on a podcast. He didn't have to do the podcast, but he's on the podcast, gets asked a direct question. He didn't shuffle blame. He didn't act like it was no big deal and people are making a bigger deal than it should be. He took fault for it and said, hey, here's what happened. Now, he also says there's, these allegations being thrown out that there was ill intent by it. And he says that's misplaced. I would ask, as a follow-up, well, what did you find out as to exactly why it happened? He makes it sound like it was a traffic issue, that they had to get to a break, and because it was sort of the B team and they didn't have College Game Day leading into it, the clock was all thrown off, and then they went to a commercial and made a decision to do that instead of airing the anthem, and it was like this split-second decision by some producer back in Bristol. And that may very well be the case. I don't know. I buy it too. I think Hutton, sometimes Occam's razor. The most likely conclusion is the conclusion. That's probably it. Now, if it's some, pink-haired liberal that's in the control room saying, I am mad about America's position on Israel, and I will not stand for this patriotism and this level of glorifying America, so I'm going to go to commercial right now and not show, then, yeah, you got something to deal with. And you probably need to fire that person or have a stern talking to them. But I buy what Burke Magnus is saying.
Well, based on what Burke Magnus is saying,
they had a traffic error.
That person would be removed based on that tone that he describes.
Yeah.
I buy the traffic issue because just behind the scenes, they're selling certain ads to air right before kickoff. Mm-hmm. And so they're trying to time it up as much as they can. And that's what they do on the normal. I mean, they're not showing the anthem for your average SEC game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're in a commercial break during that time, leading into kickoff when they join based on College Game Day. Now, this is also like they made an effort in the Texas A&M Texas game to come back and show the songs right before kickoff and the chants and the fight song. I mean, this is believable. What he's saying.
And he said everything about that day was screwed up. They're going in from Sports Center into the game and not the pregame show into the game like they normally would with guys on site. I believe him that they just screwed it up, and I applaud him for saying what happened and not running and hiding and not issuing a statement, not saying anything about it, and he owned up to it.
You know what else, Chad?
I'm not ever going to criticize someone who comes out and just owns it the way he owned it. I mean, I think he owned it also as well as you could, and I'm completely good with that explanation.
He's also the reason for the change of tone that we've seen from them, because Burke Magnus is exactly why Pat McAfee is on that network. He's been mentioned by Pat before. He's not Norby Williamson. So if you're looking for a great reason to have optimism for getting back to what ESPN once was, he's the reason for it, and he's saying it publicly now. That's great.
Yeah, he seems to be sort of the white knight as opposed to the black hat of Norby Williamson at ESPN, at least in the eyes of Pat McAfee. He also said that same interview. I went back and listened to the whole interview. He said that Pat McAfee was going to leave College Game Day, that all the criticism really did get to him, and he just basically said, I don't need it. I got my show. I've got wrestling. I've got everything else. Like, if people hate me,
he doesn't need it.
Yeah. I mean, he's just saying, like, look, I'm not going to force it. If people hate my style or whatever, I'll just leave.
That's what he said.
And you can have that
social
institution on College Game Day. But I mean, Burke Magnus went further and said we had specific discussions where he wanted to leave, and we were just give it this season, see how you like it with Nick Saban, and they had record ratings. Over 2.2 million viewers, and the chemistry with Saban was great. So he's going to be on College Game Day for a long time in the future, and he resonates with a young audience, which no one else on their set does.
McAfee is successful on College Game Day this year because of Nick Saban. He wouldn't be what he is without Saban having coming into it with more of an open mind. I'm kind of surprised by that. Yeah, with the joke.
He has fun with him.
And the reason why I really believe that is based on the whole Alabama Jones situation, where he did not like the fact that there was joking around about paying players, but
it felt like the brother element. Like, hey, my kid brother can joke with me.
Well, but McAfee never goes there.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't disrespect him. But you know what I mean? Like, we can cut up. You can feed me food on camera.
He'll
and
play
do stuff
along
like that and play.
Yeah.
But when the outsider comes in, like Shane Gillis did, and makes a joke like that, I'm not going to have that.
But it's kind of like no one goes after Howard Stern on the Stern Show.
Yeah.
It would be like no one's going after Saban specifically or the program, but he'll play along with the other stuff. Like, that's what makes them the pairing that they are. And I'm here for it, man. I thought it was great.
I did too.
It's hard not to sit and enjoy that back and forth. It's a different side of Saban.
Well, and look, I think we should be held to account for it. Is the key quote there from Burke Magnus. We at OutKick have held them to account for it, and others have as well. And for him to come out and say that and own it and say, yeah, the criticism's warranted.
Right.
I'm not going to come back and crush a guy for owning it and admitting it and saying it was a traffic mistake. I think it's time to move on for everyone when it comes to that one issue. Now, they may make some other awful editorial decision that we will criticize, at some point. But in this issue, I buy what Burke Magnus is saying, and I applaud him for being so upfront and having that level of integrity to actually admit fault, which plenty of people in his position and positions of power are unwilling or unable to do. And he was able to do it, so hats off to him.
Chad, imagine being a Lions or a Bills fan this weekend. Divisional playoffs. You've got Detroit, who had the bye week. You have Buffalo, who's won, and now they're hosting Baltimore. And the fan base that has been through the thick and the thin, and there's been a lot of thin, the nervous tension of trying to capitalize on what these seasons have been for both. Potential MVP for the Buffalo Bills at quarterback, a guy that accounts for 80% of your offense. Tremendous season. You don't want to be the Minnesota Vikings. And then Detroit, that has the number one seed, has hit a record high for wins in a season. They're the number one seed for the first time. And now they're hosting the red-hot Washington Commanders, and there's still tension about, let's not be. Everyone's like, don't be the Lions. Don't have the Lions-esque performance in Detroit. For the decades of just awful play, and now the chance to not just kick down the door, but burn down the house of time for a title, it's got to be nerve-wracking because they deserve the joy and the celebration that comes with a successful season. And the season won't be remembered because of what happens in a playoff loss this early in the postseason for what could mean ultimately a true NFL championship, a world championship. I'm pulling for both, even though I'm picking Baltimore, by the way. I'm pulling for both because of the fan bases that deserve to be able to celebrate. Not loot, not burn down the city, but celebrate as a true fan base that, deserves to have that feeling. Because a lot of fan bases have had that feeling, and these guys still show up week in and week out. Detroit and Ford Field was the most underrated stadium I went to in terms of buy-in and how loud that place was. And this was a season, they're coming off the 0-16 year, and they were 3-7 or 2-8 at the time. Awful matchup against the Titans. And that place was jammed, and it was loud. And now it's the highest ticket price in any game in NFL history that isn't a Super Bowl. And I hope they go out there and capitalize on it.
Yeah, I'm with you, Hutton. It's it's almost like if the Cubs and the Red Sox played in a World Series when both were in the middle of the drought.
Yeah.
And you knew that you were going to get one of those teams to break the drought.
Yeah.
I mean, when the Cubs won it, they won in 7 games in 2016 against the then Cleveland Indians.
Yep.
That was another notorious loser.
Another one.
In sports, right? But they had won a title in 97. So there was much more recent than the Cubs at that point. But the Cubs ending that streak, it was cool to see it against another organization that historically, hell, they made a movie, Major League, about it, how much they've lost over the years. So that was really cool to see. But this is the football version, to me, of Cubs, Red Sox, if that would have happened with both streaks on the line. And it's I think if you're just an impartial third-party fan, if you're not a fan of another team in the NFC North or the AFC East, and you're a football fan, I don't know how you don't feel great about either one of the coaches, honestly, markets, or teams winning a Super Bowl.
I think even if
they move forward.
If you're even a fan of a different team in the same division, I think you're kind of, you don't hate those teams.
Yeah, that Eagles fan that called the woman those things probably wouldn't find his way to root for another NFC East team
if
they were in the same drought.
He might, as long as he's not in the stadium, he would.
Yeah, there's probably some, that there's enough hatred of the other teams that they're not going to do it, which I understand too. Hate can be a good thing in sport too, but to me, it's nothing but love about these two stories and organizations that haven't done anything. The Bills did stuff in the 90s, but fell short 4 times.
Yeah.
And they've been really good lately.
And now you're back.
I like Dan Campbell a lot. I like Sean McDermott a lot. I love both quarterbacks. Let's get to it. Like the Bills have already won one playoff game. The Lions making their playoff debut. I think it's outstanding.
Well, so if
I'm all in on both.
If you're a fan of those, let's say Detroit, and you've got Dan Campbell who loves to roll the dice, in the back of your mind, because I feel this way, he's going to do something that ends up not going in their favor, and it will be detrimental. Because that's who he is. That's what has them here in this moment. But when the moment occurs in the postseason, it's game over. And percentages, chances are it's going to end up 50-50 in the end of the year. What happens there? How aggressive will he be? Is he the coach that's going to go for 5 consecutive times in a row against Dallas and lose the game? You go with your best play, and then eventually you end up with your 5th option, and you're still going for it instead of kicking the extra point to tie. That's where I am on it. How aggressive do you want your coach to be? Because these games are going to be tight. This matchup, over-under is 56 points for Washington on the road against Detroit. Detroit has the top scoring offense. It's them and Buffalo. And they're saying Washington's going to go in there and put up some points against that Detroit defense, the banged-up defense. Okay. That means we're looking at a one-possession game for Jaden Daniels.
I don't think that Campbell's going to change who he is at all. And I don't think that last year, with what happened in that game, when they lose, is going to change who he is.
I know.
It would almost take a Hoosiers like Jimmy Chitwood just coming to him in the moment he's about to go for it on 4th down, and Aaron Glenn just says, Coach, we'll stop him. You can punt. We'll stop him. We'll make the stop. And just stops him, and then they run the punt team on. Dramatic. He's like, all right, guys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go for 4th. We're going to go for 4th. We're going to run the trick play. And Aaron Glenn just puts a hand on his shoulder and says, Coach, we'll stop him. All right, new plan. Punt team out there. Let's go. Let's get a stop. Let's go, boys. Let's go.
Maybe it ends up being something where he doesn't show an aggressive style. It ends up making the right call.
All right, Jimmy's taking the shot after he sees the confidence in his eyes. Forget what I just said.
Forget about him.
Jimmy's going to take the shot. Coach, I'll make it.
And then there's, and then the Bills, man. They want Kansas City. They have to go through Baltimore.
Yep.
And they're the home underdog right now against the Baltimore Ravens and Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson. I don't see how that game doesn't live up to the expectation. I think, Chad, you're onto something, though. Don't necessarily have to go through Kansas City.
It's going to take an outsider to also come in and stop him from making crazy decisions at some point. But, maybe it'll pay off. It's paid off a lot for the Lions.
Speaking of paid off, you've got the revenue sharing that's going on in college sports. I nearly said college football, but that's what it is, really. With the cap of, $22 million coming up? Well, there's a new memo out from the Department of Education and a Title IX memo, more or less saying if you're going to pay the football players, you have to evenly distribute that across all sports, throwing a wrench potentially in what is planned for the revenue sharing coming up with NIL and what they're doing with all the money that's coming in and funneled through the university and the programs. Here's a post from Ted Cruz, though, and he's saying, counter to this, it's a great idea if Biden's intent was to kill both men's and women's college sports. Mandating so-called equal pay when not all sports generate equal revenue will force some colleges out of athletics altogether. Everyone wants to be paid like Michael Jordan, but that's not the way this world works. I predict this scheme will die on January 20th, coming up, of course, on Monday. That's from Ted Cruz. Here's the thing, though. He's right about, you're paid what you're worth. But everyone wants to be Michael Jordan. Some of these guys coming into school are not Michael Jordan, and they're getting paid handsomely. That's part of it in the recruitment process and how they're going to distribute things through certain athletics. But football's paying all. If it doesn't, this doesn't have to be even the schools that pay up to the cap, up to the ceiling. Just to get to, we were discussing North Carolina with Belichick coming in. They were paying $6 or $7 million to their roster.
Yeah.
And now they're paying up 15
plus.
It's
It's not the 20 to 30 that Ohio State's paying.
But that was North Carolina investing in basketball.
Yeah.
And football's getting that allocation. It may surprise you. Kansas football brings in more revenue than Kansas basketball.
Yep.
And they're not getting the same type of monetary support through the boosters, right? Even if this, I mean, the system we have now is still funneling all the funds to football. There's a way around the Title IX violation. You just go through collectives and you go through, the guy who owns the car dealership down the street. This is going through the university, and now the Title IX laws is trying to throw a wrench in this.
First off, amazing that Joe Biden suddenly cares about female athletes to this level. So bravo, Joe, because everybody's been saying you should probably help protect women's sports
or men's soccer
by keeping men who identify as women out of the game. Couldn't do that, but we're going to get these ladies paid, is what he's saying now.
Yeah.
This also, look, if you want to be on the nefarious end of this, if everybody's getting paid equally and it's distributed across all sports equally, you might end up having, for monetary reasons, some more of the issues we've been talking about at San Jose State and Penn swimming and other places also, and it becomes a bigger issue for you. I pray that does not happen. It's not how a free market economy works, right? Like Title IX is one thing. That's about educational opportunity. And I think it's a great thing. Because schools offering young women a chance to compete, first off, college sports is very uniquely American to begin with. No one else does it to this level across the globe. But offering young women a chance to get their college paid for, an education paid for with opportunities in sports is a great thing, and I think it's been great for this country. It's been great for college sports. It doesn't mean, though, that now we take that ideal of equal opportunity for for free education through sports and then apply it to a free market economy where we're going to take this one sport that's making billions and we're going to apply the same amount of money and logic to a sport that loses a school money. And all of it's going to be distributed across the board evenly to men's and women's sports. That's just it's not feasible. It's not how it works. Now, everyone who's in college sports right now says the current way business is being done is not feasible long term because there's no restrictions. There's no guidelines. There's going to be restrictions and guidelines moving forward. I hope it's soon, and I hope everyone understands and knows the rules with this. But I don't see any way that this is going to be the rule that's applied moving forward long term.
Right, and so again, if it is, we'll just stay in the system we're in.
Yeah.
Because that's how they're funneling money to the players that are bringing in the revenue for the university. This is a lot of the university trying to control the funds.
Yeah.
And right now it's the outside partnerships that they have where the funds are going through with a middleman. They're trying to eliminate the middleman and distribute money how they see fit based on the cap that they have instead of boosters and collectives determining that. Now, they're working with the coaches. But it's also very you pick and choose how you want to bring up this argument too, Chad, because, I mean, are coaches compensated the same on a college campus? No. Are facilities the same? No. Are recruiting availability, and you take the private jet to go get the gut? No, not the same. And that goes for men's and women's sports. So if you're going to pick out like, someone's football's getting 17 million of the 22, or football's getting 21 million of the 22. It's not just women's athletics that are knocking at the door of the AD complaining about it. It's the basketball program too. It's so many, baseball program too, especially for competing for national championships in all of them. And if you want to bring up Ted Cruz mentioned that not everyone's Michael Jordan. Every program though has their version of the best player, and they want that person compensated as best they can so they don't lose that player. I understand the argument if you're the coach or if you're with the program, but not from the top just trying to point out something to grandstand. Because if I need to compete for national titles and I'm the baseball coach that's competing against Tennessee, that's putting money and revenue and in their coffers, but my program's just being left out, I'm going to complain about it.
And what you're also, if this moves forward to any extent, you're encouraging to be not even club teams, just you basically license out the image of the logo of the school and the name on it to men's basketball and football because they're going to break off and do their own thing.
Yeah.
Everybody else can get paid equally that's left, but the revenue generators, See ya. It's a business. It's big business, and we got to pay. That's what the schools are going to be saying, or whoever's involved with it. We got to pay them what they're worth, and for us to compete at the highest level. And we're not going to do that by paying the women's rowing team the same way and distributing it equally. You got to pay the quarterback more. You got to pay your star edge rusher more. You got to pay your point guard more. And I don't want to see that either. But we don't hear as much about, it was amazing when Tom Luganbill brought up how Duke handles transfers in, and they either got to be a graduate or I think a 3.0 student. And I'm like, I haven't heard about academic restrictions in 2 years.
It's
3 years.
That's how they get around it with the academia.
I'm happy to hear it still exists somewhere because I haven't even heard about it.
We haven't even heard about it with Vandy.
But this is pushing it even more away where, okay, they don't even have to go to school anymore. They just happen to play in Knoxville. They just happen to play in Tuscaloosa. You can go to school if you want. It's available for you, but if not, doesn't matter.
You're onto that because during the James Franklin era at Vanderbilt, it was always how he's done it with the academic requirements.
Restrictions.
And Pavia comes in, and not once have I heard anything about that.
No.
Which, I mean...
he may be the best student ever. I have no idea.
I know. But the point is, I'm saying the coach hasn't received credit for it.
Yeah, you might see a transfer come in from, Cornell to Vandy, but you wouldn't see a transfer coming from New Mexico State.
A Harvard transfer.
To Vandy. And Tom Luganbill said Stanford still sticks with their academic integrity. They don't bring in transfers. They're very strict on that they're not going to bring in just anyone in the transfer portal. So, hey, hats off to you, but I'm not seeing Stanford compete for a lot of football and men's basketball championships right now either.
No. I guess Florida's trying to do that in basketball because they just won't let their coaches go. Won't even let them just sit on the sidelines, but they'll just stay on the bench. So Florida men's basketball assistant coach, Taurine Green, who's accused of sexual assault.
Taurine Green, who was the starting point guard on those great back-to-back Billy Donovan national championship teams with Al Horford, Joakim Noah. He was the point guard on those teams. Corey Brewer.
Now he's joining the fray of what has been a crazy saga going on with not just Florida basketball, but specifically Florida basketball and Florida athletics, really, for different reasons in other programs. But the sexual assault here, and Chad, they're just standing back saying, we're just going to let the legal process play out, and he's going to continue to coach.
Look, everybody's afforded due process and whatever investigation they have going on for Title IX that's happening at Florida, then they're going to have to go through all of that. So Taurine Green, by the way, he's accused of, and the woman is anonymous, but she was a staffer or worked in the athletic department in some capacity, and she claims that she was lured to the athletic facility under the guise of some sort of meeting with Taurine Green, and that he tried to kiss her. He tried to put his hands down her pants. She refused. Then he tried to do it again, and she basically fled. She kind of ran away at that point. She didn't come forward until the university came to her. This is where it gets really bad, I think, and convoluted for Florida. In December, it was late November, actually, when the complaints started coming in on Todd Golden. Now, the complaints at Todd Golden, I'm not to get into specifics, but they include things like unwanted sending of genitalia pics to female students at Florida, stalking charges, taking photos of the young women from his car,
sliding up in DMs
and saying that he was watching them go work out.
Yeah.
A lot of crazy, weird stuff. And then unwanted advances to, again, I think some of the students who work with the Florida basketball team.
And it's the student paper that's reporting this.
When this investigation started, they started interviewing different complainants, and then they went to this young woman because everybody knew about that story too. So she only came forward with Taurine Green allegation because they came to her and said, we understand that you're a part of this also. Tell us your story. And now the story comes out about Taurine Green.
So
look, I don't know what Todd Golden did or didn't do. I don't know what Taurine Green did or didn't do. These are serious allegations.
Very much so.
It's really, really bad. Let me get back to ESPN because I just got done praising them here a little bit a while back in this segment. This is what really drives me crazy about ESPN and editorial decision-making. When Bruce Pearl was the coach at Tennessee, Bruce Pearl was being investigated for having, this is not satire, he had an illegal barbecue at his house. It happened about a month or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I don't really remember the details, too early during a dead period of recruiting. And Aaron Kraft, who he was recruiting, went on to be a star point guard at Ohio State, ratted on Tennessee to the NCAA, and Bruce Pearl got caught for having and he lied about it. Essentially, that was the real damning thing. He lied to the NCAA about having the illegal barbecue at his house, okay? Every single game Tennessee played that year, this was an ESPN partnership at the time, every single time, every Tennessee fan was treated to a timeline. I'm guessing 3 or 4 times throughout the game. Here is the NCAA timeline. Here is when the barbecue took place. Here's when the allegation took place. Here's where Bruce Pearl was interviewed. Here's where he lied. Here's where the news broke. And here we go. Every single game. Here's the NCAA timeline for Tennessee. I have not heard, unless someone can correct me on this, I've watched a number of Florida games this year. Watched them quite a bit. Really good team. Talented. High scoring. I haven't seen word one about this massive Title IX investigation. I haven't seen timelines. I haven't seen any mention of it with Todd Golden and his staff at Florida. Why? Is it just the SEC telling you not to do it? I feel like ESPN, they've done things in the past that the SEC probably wouldn't like. They've talked about officiating. They've talked about the faking of injuries, all this stuff. Now, I think Greg Sankey gave them the go-ahead to criticize faking injuries at some point this past year. But nonetheless, why are we not hearing more from ESPN during the games about Todd Golden and Florida? Just be consistent with it.
Chad,
I think the Bruce Pearl example is the best one I can come up with that's totally different in their approach to how they handled something that was so much more minor. Even at the time, the NCAA was a serious entity, and people took them seriously, but it was so much more minor than what's being accused at Florida.
We took them seriously, and they were just as pissed off, by the way, of a coach lying to them. But
very spiteful.
Compare it to the line that took place with what Michigan just went through.
Yeah,
for football, a totally different response.
At least with that, during those Michigan games, that's all they would talk about. That was always a point of conversation.
There was more Connor Stallions, though, than the recruiting aspect.
And somebody raised their hand if they've watched Florida and they are hearing a lot of talk about Todd Golden's sexual allegations during the games. I haven't heard a word about it.
Here's the other part of this, too. Beyond the media, the universities and the athletic departments, they go into these investigations on these coaches well before it's in the news. Think about Michigan State with Mel Tucker, how long they were looking into that, and Mel Tucker was still coaching. It was middle of September when news broke about what was going on with him. And by the end of the month, he's fired, but they were allowing him to coach not just a day or two after they found out, months after these investigations had started. Northwestern with the hazing investigation that was going on about Pat Fitzgerald. That had been going on for 6 months. And he was going into the season allowed to coach. Florida's not the only university that allows their coaches to stay on the sideline. It's whenever the media gets a hold of it and actually it becomes a part of the story that they're pressed to do something. And in this case at Florida, it's the student newspaper, the Alligator, that's doing most of the reporting with this.
Yeah.
So therein lies the whole, I think, backdrop as to why the coaches are there. It's because the universities they don't have to act because no one really presses them to do anything.
I'm with you on that.
And by the way, you can suspend with pay.
I'm not advocating that Florida should just fire him point blank.
You can suspend with pay.
Yeah, I'm not saying they need to fire him right now. Now, if there's plenty of evidence where you believe all this stuff is true and there's evidence of it and you fire him, great. I would have no objection to that. I'm not saying they should fire him. My issue is with anyone carrying the games that this is a major storyline that they're not even talking about. They're not even mentioning during a game, which I find to be crazy. It is the third leading story right now at ESPN.com, is Florida assistant to coach despite sex assault allegations. That's the headline at ESPN. So ESPN.com is covering it.
But the game day won't. That's what you're saying.
But if I don't even know who Florida plays tomorrow. I'll look it up. If I tune in tomorrow,
someone good.
If I tune in tomorrow and watch Florida, I'm willing to bet you that there's not a single mention the entire time of what's going on. And some will say, oh, well, you guys are all about stick to sports and only talk about sports and we tune in sports. Of course we do that. This affects the games.
That's the story.
Because if Todd Golden is under investigation for these really bad accusations and his job is in jeopardy, that affects on-court Florida Gator basketball.
They play the Texas Longhorns.
A team, by the way, who is a possible Final Four team from a talent perspective, the way they've looked this year. So it's absolutely a story if he's in danger of being the head coach moving forward
and
or not.
He'll stay in Gainesville coaching.
It affects the basketball.
Florida
too.
hosting Texas coming up.